I think we're just trying to make people aware of is everyone's like, oh my God, they're like censoring me or they're turning off my account. It's like, first of all, it was never your account in the first place. It was never your followers in the first place. It was never your identity in the first place. It was never your content in the first place. Everything that you do, say, and engage with is owned by these centralized companies. Everything you do.
So we've got a tripod set up right now, between the three of us, and people can take that however they want. And man, it's just such a great honor to be able to talk with you guys right now, because you guys are brewing some very special things, which we're going to talk about today, and some absolutely world-changing things. But I want to kick things off because a big part of human health is community, is connection, is even being able to express ourselves and to have a feeling of significance and value. So JP, if you could talk about what those things mean to you and what you're seeing in the world right now.
Yeah, man. I mean, at a high level, I think connection is what allows the life force in us all to flow. I mean, you look at disease, whether it's like societal disease or disease of the body, and disconnection seems to be what causes disease. You get cancer, and that's like cells of the body behaving in a very disconnected way. But when you can transcend that and connect what was previously disconnected, not only do I think we return to health, but we realize in that state that life is a freaking miraculous gift. And I also believe the design team gave us all a beautiful mind, a beautiful heart, and a voice to express our beautiful, unique minds and our unique heart. And our voice is part of what allows us to connect with other people. Now, to say the least, right now we're living in a way where disconnection is being perpetuated. I would even dare say disconnection is being celebrated as a virtuous thing. Now, the people that celebrate it and promote that narrative of disconnection is good, like they believe something different than you gotta get them out of your life. Oh, like your parents are making different choices than you. Well, you gotta yell at them or disconnect them, disown them. The people perpetuating that aren't people I want to take advice from. Yet that disconnect mentality and all the ways it's stated, it's masqueraded as a healthy, desirable virtue. And to me, that's like putting cyanide in the health food section. It's not a healthy supplement. It's actually a detriment. So many would say, by many, I mean, this is something I say. I don't know if other people say it, but I think we're either in the process of the Great Reset or the Great Awakening. And I do think we're in the process of choosing to make it the Great Awakening. The Great Reset, it's all about disconnection, disconnecting you from your truth in order for you to perpetuate some narrative that's outsourced. It's not coming from you. The Great Awakening is we connect to our truth, we connect to our critical thinking, we connect to our heart, and we connect with our courage in order to be honest with ourselves. And that allows us to therefore connect with the outside world because we're connected on the inside. And I think that's all the Great Awakening. And I know that's what Justin and I are working to doing together at a high level. But man, we live in a world, and you got me excited, Shawn. I'm going to shut up in a second. But we live in a world where the nutrient that our human body is starved for is the nutrient of connection. Last thing I'll say on that, the illusion of connection is agreement. The reality of connection is acceptance. And what I mean by that is I think the junk food version of connection is believing that if we agree on something, then we can be connected. And that's real connection. Nope, that's still a divisive mentality, because it implies if we don't agree, you're disconnected right away. Oh, you voted for so-and-so? Out of my life. No, real connection, in my opinion, is not agreement-based. That's trying to connect with our minds. That's not built for real connection. I think our hearts are what's built for connection, and our hearts have the ability to unconditionally accept. So Shawn and Justin, we can all sit around and talk about health, philosophies, politics. We're not going to agree on everything, but we can accept each other in spite of the reality that we hold different perspectives about different things. So we're living in a beautiful time where we're soaking up more connection because we've never needed it more. And I think we do that by having the mentality of accepting other people in spite of our differences, celebrating our differences. To me, that's real diversity, not the illusion of diversity.
Yeah, I love that so much. This understanding of acceptance versus agreement is a powerful hallmark. And the crazy thing is that our connection has ventured from offline connections to online to a great extent. And we're not in to get into a debate of good or bad here, but it's just what is. And it's a beautiful opportunity, of course. But these platforms can become silos of agreement. And it's one of the complex things that we're trying to navigate right now. And I feel, as you mentioned, this is an opportunity to awaken. It's turbulent, but that turbulence can allow us to fly to new levels. But right now we're in the mess. We're in the suck right now. And I want to ask you about this because Justin, and by the way, this story is amazing. We'll get to your story in just a moment, but right now through social media, we've recently seen big social media platforms implementing practices that marginalize people, that steal and sell our information, our private information, and censoring of its users' voices, and working as even a purveyor of government agenda. It's just crazy things that you wouldn't think would happen here in the land of the free, the home of the brave. So can you talk a little bit about the changes that have been happening with popular social media networks in the last few years?
So I think fundamentally what we're seeing is as the business models expand and as the fundamental understanding of how do these platforms make money, we are actually shown the true potential of their power, right? Because if you think about every one of these services, they own so much of the inherent internet that we understand, right? So even at I think the internet is made up of a few core things. One is your identity. The next is a verifiable credential of who you are within that identity. And then the money that moves around that system. All of those elements are highly centralized and controlled by individual companies. So we've had this illusion to think that we have any sort of ownership on traditional social networks. And we've had this illusion to think that we have rights when we in fact have zero rights. And I think that's the thing that I think we're just trying to make people aware of is everyone's like, oh my God, they're censoring me or they're turning off my account. It's first of all, it was never your account in the first place. It was never your followers in the first place. It was never your identity in the first place. It was never your content in the first place. Everything that you do, say, and engage with is owned by these centralized companies. Everything you do, even down to the base layer of who you are, is owned by these individual companies. So I think that once we've realized that and kind of come to that, now it's okay, where do we go to move forward? Because there is a fundamental illusion that we've set along ourselves. Man, they turned us off and they weren't supposed to do that. It's well, who said they were never supposed to do that? Right? Just it was let me start a Facebook account. Let me get a bunch of followers on Facebook. And then the moment that we need to start making money, it's oh, actually, if you want to reach those people, you got to pay us a lot of money because we own the relationship, not you.
Man, this is an idea that I got to tell you, even getting onto these platforms myself, I didn't really think about. We're really just acting like it's our account. We're actually on their territory and they could, but this is also one of the big arguments is that they can do whatever they want because it's their platform. And we have this concept that it's all being done equally though, because at least we would have this concept of equality and freedom. But in fact, and I'm going to share this with everybody. So this report was published in the Wall Street Journal and the headline reads, Facebook says its rules apply to all. Company documents reveal a secret elite that's exempt. And a quote from the report says, we are not actually doing what we say we do publicly. And this was from a confidential reviewer. It called the company's actions, quote, a breach of trust, and added, unlike the rest of our community, these people can violate our standards without any consequences. So we see this discrimination taking place, marginalization. We also are coming into it thinking that these things are equal. Like, we follow the community guidelines. And JP had a great piece saying that, you know, the biggest community guideline that he broke was breaking community guidelines. It's very difficult to find out what the that actually means. And it's happened to me as well, of course, you know, sharing something that is all based on what I would seem to be all these different peer-reviewed papers, and that not being good enough and having that censored or taken down. And then, you know, you have the ability to appeal. And I'm like, okay, I examined all of these community guidelines. I didn't break any of these things, and it still gets denied because I broke community guidelines. You know, it's a very complicated terrain. And of course, you guys have seen this happen a lot over these last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's entirely our fault. And I'll share what I mean by that in a second. But first, you know, if just to amplify something that Justin said, looking at reality, not what we want, not the way a lot of people think it should be, but what the reality is. When you're on any of the mainstream social media companies, you not only don't own your identity online, you don't own your profile, you don't own who you think you are on Instagram or Facebook. You don't own that, nor do you own your audience. So I look at the audience I've built up online, you know, outside of Zion, it's a little over 6 million people. That's a mansion I built in someone else's backyard. They can kick me out anytime. I've had threats, I've been censored, but I don't own that audience, nor do I own my identity online. So that's not what a lot of people want, but that's the reality. And it's 100% our fault. And I think it's great that it's our fault, because we as a collective, we've put all our eggs into that basket. You know, it was the first paradigm of social media. Like, the first of anything. Is it going to be perfect from the get-go? No. Like, could you imagine the first car that was ever built and be like, all right, this is the first paradigm of cars. Like, there's no problems. We're never going to improve this. No, we've made so much improvement now. So now we're entering the new paradigm of social media, because we've had a chance to learn what the problems are with the current model. You don't own your identity, you don't own your audience, community guidelines that you don't really know what they are, free speech is infringed on, it's all centralized. So that's taught us a lot of what doesn't work. We've had a couple decades to learn that. So now we're entering the new paradigm where we've realized it's our fault, because that's what we've subscribed to, where we've put our energy, our money, our time and attention. And the good news is, if we admit something's our fault, just like if someone's 50 pounds overweight, they realize, hey, this is my fault. I don't exercise, I eat garbage, I don't sleep well. It's my fault. And that empowers the individual to choose a better way. But you first got to take responsibility. So we've taken responsibility, it's our fault. And now we're choosing to do things a better way.
Yeah, that's powerful. So many people, once all of this really started to transpire, a lot of folks were jumping off of the quote bigger platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and going over to places like Parler and Rumble. And those are great, and I use them. I think they're fantastic, but there's still a fundamental issue that we're missing when we're utilizing these platforms, thinking that our information or our voices are our own and that they're safe. Justin, can you talk about, for like, Parler got straight up taken off the internet. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're all building the same thing. I think that's the thing is, if you look at the fundamental tech stack that these companies are being built on, it's exactly the same stack, right? It's a centralized server established through a centralized identity. They're using third-party advertising to subsidize the cost of the services onto the network. They take the data that you use of your account and all the videos you watch and subsidize it through a third party. It's just a different pledge. It's just like, it's literally I would say technically the same exact website with a different logo at the top and a different owner, right? One is owned by some Canadian, the other one is owned by, it's publicly traded, the other one is owned by Donald Trump. Like at the end of the day, it's the same stack. So you're either choosing, do you want to give Mark Zuckerberg your data or Donald Trump your data? Which one do you choose? Like which is the one that you're feeling out that day? So fundamentally, if you're going to build a new network, a new type of network, a new type of social network, you have to start at the base layer of what is the monetary instrument that allows this company to be created, right? So I have this general thesis that I put out in 2020. And really the lens of this was the pandemic starts and I'm like, you know what? I think social is going to break over the next few months. And I think there's a future thesis that I have of like, what does the future of social media look like? It's 6 points. One, it must be built on a digital monetary layer. The second thing, it has to allow for permissionless innovation, which means that it's open source. The next thing is that it has to be focused on peer governance versus platform governance, meaning that the individuals that use the service govern what happens inside of it versus a overarching platform. It must be censorship resistant. The creators own everything, and you as a user have digital property rights set through encryption, private public key encryption. This is like my general thesis of what should the future of social look like. There aren't a lot of companies that are live today that meet these standards. One of them might use one or two, but generally they don't meet all of these standards. And I was set out to say something should exist in the world that has all of these particular standards because it's what we deserve as a society, is that we have the technology for the first time to have full control of a monetary asset digitally, which is Bitcoin. And that's the thing behind me here. For the first time, we can own our money. For the first time, we can own all of our data. For the first time, we can own our digital identity and be free to communicate with another individual without a third-party arbiter in the middle being the broker. And by the way, that all can be on an open standard on the internet, right? There's so many like layers to why this is like one of the most important things is like the money needs to be fixed, right? Like I think one thing that came up today, I was with a friend and like, I don't know if you're seeing these sanctions happening in Russia, but like who knew that two companies can literally turn off a country's entire monetary flow overnight? Like, do we realize how powerful Visa and MasterCard are that they can turn off a country and no one can transact within that country anymore? Like, do we not think that that's a problem in the world that like someone can just turn you off? And like, then you realize like, okay, that's one layer. Your money can be turned off. Then what about your identity? Oh yeah, there's 1.5 billion Gmail accounts that you use to log in downstream to 10 billion centralized services. But the base layer is Gmail. What happens if that Gmail account turns you off? Everything goes away, right? So it's like, we have given up convenience for control for these companies. They have full control for our convenience, but it's the first time that we have to like go back and grab it. Like we have the opportunity to take it back. I'm fired up about this stuff because it's really meaningful to me. It's my life's work at this point.
Yeah.
Justin, may I interject real quick, Shawn? I'm going to censor you. This is your podcast. I'm running the show. But Justin, as you were sharing those 6 points to your thesis, what I heard you describing is a digital democracy, like what a democracy is meant to be, where you have property rights, you own your things, you're not governed over, and it's the people determining the rules, not the rulers determining how the people are going to be ruled. So what I heard you say is the old way still exists if you want to succumb to it. The old way is a digital dictatorship, and the new way that we're hungry for it is the digital democracy. And where do you want to live is the question.
I mean, and it's not just that, like this is kind of a transition, like a little bit into, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about the book that we wrote, JP. And one of the chapters in the book is the centralized century versus the decentralized century, right? So arguably the 20th century was the century of centralization. And the problems that we're dealing with today is because all of the downstream systems that we're using were developed in the centralized era, right? So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was established in the 1950s to regulate very specific large conglomerate companies. They're like, oh, okay, we have to regulate Pfizer and Merck and these individuals, but they never had the concept that there would be individual doctors doing individual studies on what's important for our health. And it freaks them out that there's people in these fringes doing their own studies to learn about the body, because it's not a centralized body, because that's how they've been built. We're fighting a centralized system because that's what everything was established towards. This will go downstream of every effect. Even the internet, for the most part, started out to be this centralized authority. But now we have the innovation with cryptography and transistors that allow us to go into the decentralized century, the 21st century that we're living through now. And that combating of those two environments is why we're seeing so much turmoil and chaos. Because as you've said so many times, JP, we are decentralized humans at our nature. And being centralized is not what we're built to do. It's not fundamental to us. And that's the conflict, is these two worlds and these two systems colliding.
Facts. So the FDA, of course, I have quite a bit of insight into their inner workings, and have been working to just share these things with people. And we wonder why things can get to this place. Why is it that there's this one governing body that's telling us what's okay for us to do? That in of itself is a problem. And Justin, I heard you say before that in regards to the FDA, the truth doesn't always win in a centralized system. The narrative always wins. It's powerful stuff, man. And just one little nugget here to add, the FDA right now, we see, again, with the centralized system, that corruption is so much easier, and it's so much easier to overlook it because it's happening within that same chamber. Right now with the FDA, it's been set up in a way under the guise of for our good that pharmaceutical companies can pay them billions of dollars every single year to give, paying in the form of these quote user fees to get their drugs reviewed, right? Under the guise that we're going to get drugs to people faster. But what that does is it opens a big gaping hole for corruption, for bribery, and all these things to sneak their way in.
Yeah, I mean, remember how these things started, right? When the FDA started, it was designed to regulate very specific organizations, and there was one news network, and there was one newspaper, and you had one television, and you had one, like everything was centralized at that time. And now you move into this century where we have our cell phones, we have app stores, we have the ability, we have independent journalism through Substack, and now there's all this fringe messaging that's occurring, and the system can't handle it. It's like, well, this is not how we were built. You're only supposed to listen to the one thing at the one time for the one. Like the failures, I think, of this last two administrations and the failures of COVID is just a result of the centralized authority of what was happening. There was no doubt that COVID was dangerous. There's no doubt that it killed people, but the problem was the centralized system could not handle breaking people up in different perspectives. They had to just have this is the way we do it for everybody. And that's not how the world works anymore. They have to keep up to date that we are living in a decentralized world, and every base layer has to move to this decentralized era, and the conflict will eventually evaporate. But we're still in the middle of all that conflict.
Conflict is where JP swims. He's swimming in conflict, so he knows a thing or 20 about this. So JP, what was it? And actually, you know what? I think this is a good point. Before getting your insight on this, Justin, your ideas, you're not just pulling these out of your you actually went through something really remarkable to get you to this place of understanding. Can you share a little bit of your story, just a snapshot of going from, selling your game-changing tech company to unexpected brain surgery, which I don't know if any brain surgery is expected necessarily, but can you share a little snapshot into that and what got you connected with JP?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been just a fundamentally believer in creators are the most powerful mechanisms change for the past 10 years. Started my first company in 2012. It was an app that connected influencers to brands, and basically was an idea that influential people on the internet should be compensated for the things they're doing on social media through brands in a simple way. Here's an app to do that. Sold that company in 2016, stayed on the board till 2018, did all the lists and all this stuff for my parents, got Forbes 30 and 30, all those things really for my parents to like be proud of me and stuff. And then 2019, the end of 2019, I was sitting in a dentist chair and this light turned on, you know, when like those lights in a dentist chair turned on, and I passed out. I kind of like went into the light. I woke up a few minutes later. I was pale white, started throwing up, and the doctor was like, "Oh, you just passed out. You're fine." Eventually I get to the ICU. They found that I had a cavernoma in my right temporal lobe, which was a series of blood vessels that had exploded and created a hemorrhagic stroke in my right temporal lobe. And so basically they said, "Hey, we got to keep you here for about 3 days." They did an angiogram to check if it was an AVN or not. Well, thank God it wasn't an AVN. And then 6 weeks later, I had a craniotomy to take this benign tumor out of my brain. That was January 6th, basically 2 months before COVID started. And so I had a nice pregame to 2020, which was a brain surgery. And it's very like, it's a challenging experience. Like, you know, I just done an Ironman, full distance Ironman 2 months before. And I was like, man, I'm top of my game. I sold my business, all was good. And then boom, like your brain starts bleeding and like, what do you do in the world? And it kind of woke me up to the fact, like I was taking some time off and like, maybe I should get back to work. And then, so basically 3 months after brain surgery, I get introduced to, I read the Lightning white paper. I'm like, wow, the Lightning Network in Bitcoin is actually like one of the most incredible solutions for creators to monetize directly from their fans with no central authority. And then I started Zion a few weeks later and began coding the application at the November of 2020. And, you know, 6 months after brain surgery, started building a new business. So I think that's like a short version of my story. And then I moved to Austin. And then how did I meet JP? Bunch of people said, "Justin, you got to meet JP." And so I met JP.
People say that a lot. You got to meet JP. And
amazing human.
So you had a COVID appetizer of brain surgery, a hole drilled into your head.
Still have a titanium plate holding my skull together right on the side.
Jesus, man. Justin, you're a superhero, man. So JP, if you could elaborate, when you met Justin, what was it about this idea that resonated with you? And for both of you guys, I really see and why I really do deeply admire, and I just really love you guys and appreciate what you're doing, because you're action takers. When these things are happening in the world, a lot of people are like, you know, it'd be great if somebody did fill in the blank. You guys are like, I'm doing that. So JP, what was it about Justin and this new platform that attracted you?
Yeah, well, you know, first, all the people telling me I've got to meet Justin, you know, and I'm in a fortunate position where there's far more people that reach out to me than what I have time to even handle. But the heavy hitters in Austin, like Aubrey Marcus and just these amazing people, kept saying, "JP, we love how you're standing up for freedom, how you're helping to awaken humanity to their God-given nature of freedom. Love what you're doing. And because you're doing that, you got to meet Justin." So after enough people let me know that, I'm like, well, I guess I got to meet Justin then, don't I? So Justin and I, our first conversation was February of 2021. And it was great. Like I learned a big picture of what he was doing, but quite honestly, still didn't have the technical knowledge to fully grasp it. But I knew, like, oh, this guy, he's working on solving the problem that pisses me off the most: censorship and centralized social media companies having power over human expression and human connection. Didn't know exactly how he was doing it because I didn't understand, but I was very intrigued. And then it was a few months later where Justin called me up and said, I really want to sit down, have another talk where what I'm doing is growing since we last talked, and I want you to be involved. And, you know, in my head, I'm thinking, involved? Like, I don't need anything else to do. My plate's too full as it is. But because I knew Justin, knew what he was doing, I wanted to learn more. So it's like, I'm not going to be involved, but let's talk for sure. And we talked, and that question of to be involved or not, man, it my heart was just saying, like, what Justin's building with Zion is so aligned with the mission of freedom. It's my duty to be involved, because it's one thing, and I'm so proud of it, but helping to support the freedom movement through the messages I get out through my comedy, so proud of that. But there's also this other angle of literally building the digital infrastructure of freedom and sovereignty that I certainly don't know how to do, but what I can do is know it's needed, and I've got a lot of eyeballs on me. So it absolutely felt like my duty. It's just kind of like if there's a life-saving supplement nutrient, well, I don't know how to formulate it, but I would feel like it's my duty to let people know this is essential for life. If you want it, here it is. So yeah, my heart was very inspired to say, yes, I do want to be involved in bringing Zion to the world, because it solves a lot of the problems of the digital dictatorship, which is our fault for being in. But where I was at for so long, Shawn, I knew the problem existed. I didn't know what to do about it, and I certainly didn't see any viable solution. So when I learned what Justin's doing with Zion, I said, well, that's the solution. That's the digital democracy that the world's been needing, but just hasn't had. So here's the solution. In my mind, like, there's the Holy Grail in broad daylight. So, I don't want to minimize my role with Zion, but I also want to be real. The genius behind it, the digital infrastructure, that it's first of its kind, it's not at all coming from my mind. I'm just the guy helping bring awareness to the world about what Zion is, because it's pretty damn important to me.
Yes, this time in history is forcing innovation of this type. And when I first had the conversation with you guys about it, I could not stop talking about it. I've been telling everybody, it's been behind the scenes, like to people who are quote influencers, a lot of MDs, a lot of folks who are doing work, trying to share on different platforms. So before we even went any further, I've been telling people about this because it's so remarkable. So Justin, if you could, can you share exactly what Zion is and how it works and why it's so different from anything that's ever existed?
So Zion, first of all, is a utility. I want to express that, is that some people, and sometimes I even slip saying like it's a platform. I think platform implies centralization. So the first thing is that it's a utility. It's an open source utility. And what we allow for is that we allow creators and fans to develop three core things on an open standard. The first thing that they can establish is using the Lightning Network to monetize their audiences through decentralized payments of Bitcoin. The second piece is to establish their identity using a DID, decentralized identity. This is an open source standard used by some of the largest companies in the world, and it's an open standard that everyone can use. And then the final piece is data storage through an identity hub. So the concept is that for the first time, right, you can go and establish a decentralized identity and then attach a wallet, a Lightning wallet, to that identity. And inside of the app, you can also create communities. So for example, JP has a community inside of the Zion application, the Zion client. And inside of this community, the cool thing is that, first of all, you own your identity, you own the wallet, and you own all the content that you post within that community through this complex engineering that we have. And mind you, you don't have to believe what I'm saying. We are 100% open source. You can go to our website and you can see every piece of code we've ever written is publicly available for someone to verify what I'm saying is true. But effectively, we're trying to be a Web3 social network built on Bitcoin. We're built on the Bitcoin standard. We use everything that the Bitcoin blockchain can achieve in terms of consensus and security, all built into an app that you can see. So it might look like a regular social app to you, but the underlying infrastructure is very different than a traditional centralized network.
And amen. And if I could add to that, Shawn, there's three pieces of that are vital to me. Zion's censorship resistant, it's decentralized, and it facilitates human connection. And the censorship resistance, just speaking to that briefly, we talked about like Rumble, Parler, Getters, which, Shawn, just like you mentioned, I'm fans of those. I'm on those platforms. I want them to succeed. However, they don't solve the problem. They take a step away from the problem. They pledge, we're not going to censor, but it's a centralized company and they still could censor if they wanted. They could govern over you. So basically, as a user of those platforms, you just have to hope that they don't have a changing of the guard or shareholders that start to demand censorship or modulating data as a way of protecting their bottom line. But with Zion, it's not possible to censor. It's Justin mentioned earlier, we're decentralized human beings. Like, Shawn, if you and I are out in the woods talking, of course, nobody's going to be censoring our conversation because we're in a natural state. We're functioning how humans should function. We're decentralized out in the woods together. That's how Zion is. It's not possible to censor because it's not built in a dictatorial kind of way. And then the decentralization component, we've seen all the problems with centralization. Justin, you mentioned Visa and MasterCard shutting down funds in Russia. We saw GoFundMe with the Canadian truckers. We know what happens with our centralized authorities all over the place. So it's decentralized. It's power to the people, owning your identity, owning your audience that you build, where like, cool, you're building your house on your property, your mansion in your own yard. And then the facilitation of human connection. I mean, that's really what it all boils down to me. Human connection with no one trying to govern how you connect with other people. It's the free exchange. It's the natural state of how I believe humans are meant to function in a way of dignity, where we have our freedom and our sovereignty without a Mark Zuckerberg or whoever it is, community guidelines, looking over your shoulders, saying you can say that, you can't say that. That's the narrative. Cool, go ahead. That's against the narrative. Can't say that. Where it respects the human being, where if you hear something you don't like on Zion, you stop paying attention to it. You unsubscribe from that creator. Problem solved. I have the self-responsibility to do that. So the censorship resistance, the decentralization, and the facilitation of connection are the highlights in my mind. Just the brief JP summary of what I heard Justin say.
And I think one thing to echo also is like our business model is fundamentally different, right? Like the day we launched, we said, hey, Zion is not free, because we didn't want to subsidize all of this, because it's not easy to build a tech company. It's quite expensive. We said, hey, our business model will be that you're subscribing to be part of this particular private network. And the way that we pay for our, my team salaries, I don't collect any money from the company, is to subsidize their engineering costs to build this infrastructure, and you're paying to be on it. That's why we never take your data. We'll never manipulate your data. You are subsidizing for us to build this infrastructure. And we appreciate it so much that you are our customer, because our relationship is with you. Every other service is their customer is a third party usually, right? Because if you're subsidizing through advertising, the customer is not the person using the service. It's the brand. Right. And that's the world that I came from for a long time. So the business model is also fundamentally different. And we're not making up our own currency either. We're using Bitcoin, right? So there's some people in the Web3 space that are making up their own token and basically inventing a illegal security. We are not doing that. We are using the open monetary standard that is Bitcoin. We're not building a token. We have no tokens in this thing. So I think these are other important elements of the fundamentals of the business built on Bitcoin.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's an incredible undertaking, and all the people, the little elves that are behind the scenes making this happen, being able to funnel resources to them, like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this show Startup before, but it's a really great show, and it's a startup. And it's also something related to digital currency as well. But then there's where the drama comes, is like shady investors and that kind of stuff. We don't have any of that here. We've got investors like Aubrey Marcus, Tony Robbins, JP really incredible human beings who see the beauty in this and having real freedom financially, and also just with your ability to express yourself and to share your voice and to express value.
We had so much, I think we have so much gratitude of what we've been able to build in a few short months. Is like, we've been able to build a business very, it's very early, but like, we've been able to go look at the world and say, who do we want to be involved in this project? Self-select the best people on the planet, get them into the mix of it, then go out to the world and be like, hey, we built this thing and we built it with all these amazing people. Like, would you like to help us? And what's happened and the energy around that experience is just, to me, mind blowing. Every day is like an amazing surprise because we have supportive, I think, because our heart is really in the right place. Like we truly, like when I wake up every day, there's a lot of product people, and I would say I'm a product person at heart. They try to build products that allow an individual to work with a piece of code, right? So they're building an instrument so an individual interacts with their product and what's more effective. My mission every day is to build technology that allows individuals to interact with each other in a better way. My reframe around how I build technology is around how people are connected digitally in a more cohesive ecosystem. And that's my theme and my lens of how I build things. That's the way that I've always focused on things. So I think also fundamentally how we approach product is extremely important, because if we would build the product in the way that all of our competitors do, and I don't really like to think they're competitors in this space, is that people are building those products that, how can you interact with my platform better? Instead of, how can I interact with my fans better? How can I interact with another person better? How can I interact with JP in a more effective way and build a closer connection because I really have an affinity towards him as a creator?
Yes. Well, I wanted to have this conversation today. This is the Model Health Show, and we're really analyzing and providing resources for all areas of health. It's not this vanilla thing. I'm a nutritionist, so for me, food was everything, but it's also sleep. It's movement. It's community. It's our relationships, and also our financial well-being has a huge impact on our health and our levels of stress, and so these things matter. And there's a transition that's taking place right now. And JP, I want to ask you about this because you actually did one of your incredible videos kind of poking fun at Bitcoin, for example. And you just mentioned the ability for people who are protesting in their country, a country that is supposedly based on freedom, in Canada, where these truckers who were just wanting to express their voices and they raised money, somebody helped them to raise money, and the government's just like, nope, you're terrorists, you don't get this money. And you talked about turning off currency in other countries, in Russia. And oftentimes the victims of these things are the citizens who don't agree with, nor are they participating in what the government agency is. And so the same thing happens here in the United States. If we have conflict with other countries, it's not the countries, it's not the people themselves. It's these centralized, action figures of what government is supposed to be, who is driving this conflict. It's not the people. We don't want people to be hurt. We don't want to turn off somebody's ability to pay their rent and to get groceries because there's a conflict between, who we deem to be our so-called leaders. So can you talk about your ideas, how they've changed with this new technology with currency?
Yeah, they've changed so much. I want to, I love to call out how I've been an idiot born out of my own ignorance, because I think it models growing, evolving, learning. If we can't look at our past self and find places where we say like, dude, I completely disagree with what I used to believe. If we can't do that in the name of staying consistent, guess what? You're not learning, you're not growing, you're not someone that I want to learn from, certainly. So I think it was back in 2017, I put out a video, like legitimately making fun of Bitcoin people, like, these people are this giant pyramid scheme. They're looking at this currency that has no value other than the fact that other people think it's valuable. So, and mind you, that's my understanding of it wasn't based off of an in-depth look. It was based off of like just catching a few headlines or what are people talking about. But what really woke me up, two things, even right before I started talking to Justin, thank God I had my eyes open, or else I probably would have been too ignorant, because, Zion runs on Bitcoin. It's fascinating. But someone, I mean, you just had him on your show, Shawn, Tony Robbins. He sent me a video. He said, JP, watch this video. It was a private video that he recorded for his platinum partners. He just, generous friend, he sent it to me. It was him interviewing Michael Saylor. Now, if someone's into Bitcoin, you probably know who Michael Saylor is. If you're not into Bitcoin, Michael Saylor, he's considered one of the authority figures on Bitcoin. And this is someone who's made a ton of money, ton of success before getting into Bitcoin. So he's not someone who just like, cool, I got rich because I made a lucky investment in Bitcoin. He's a very knowledgeable person, but he explained Bitcoin in such a way that it clicked for me. So PS, anybody out there, if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, look up Michael Saylor. So just summarizing what I learned, there's Bitcoin, the asset, and then Bitcoin, the network. Bitcoin, the asset, is basically like, cool, that's your crypto, that's Bitcoin, that's kind of like decentralized money. It solves a lot of problems just being decentralized. But then there's Bitcoin, the network, how that money is sent from one person to another, not one person to a central bank to another. It's so this whole network that can also then be utilized for things that aren't just Bitcoin financial transactions. So it really woke me up like, wow, there's Bitcoin technology and Bitcoin, the asset. So I also learned from Michael Saylor, when you look at our US currency and a lot of the fiat currencies around the world, they're losing value right now. I mean, you lose your breath. You hit your lactate threshold right now. If you're looking at the rate of inflation in the US, if you're storing your value in US currency, the analogy is you're holding ice and it's literally melting in your hand. If you're saving money in your bank account, you are losing money simply because of inflation. The value is melting away. The dollar sign might not change, but the value of that dollar amount is changing. But Bitcoin, it's proven to be the safest, most secure monetary instrument on earth. And it wasn't built by centralized authorities. It was built by a wise person with power to the people in mind. That's why it's decentralized, and that's why there's a fixed ceiling. Whereas I believe in the past year, 40% of all US dollars ever in existence were printed in the past 12 months. And what that does is devalues the hell out of all the money that you and I have worked our butts off to accumulate. But Bitcoin doesn't do that. It's a fixed amount. Therefore, the value doesn't melt away like ice. So at this point, Shawn, I've completely forgotten your question, but I will say my eyes used to be wide shut about Bitcoin. Now they're eyes wide open, not only in terms of how I protect and preserve my family's future financially. I've gone really heavy into Bitcoin. And then with my life energy of supporting a solution that solves so many of the world's problems, Zion, that's built on Bitcoin. So my opinion on Bitcoin has changed tremendously in accordance with me learning about what Bitcoin actually is and what it's capable of, and how bright humans like Justin can use Bitcoin technology to then build technology on top of to serve humanity very well.
So mind-blowing. We got to talk about this a little bit because I just want to hear you guys' perspective on this. So right now, the United States federal government is in $30 trillion of debt, I believe is the latest numbers. Who the are we in debt to? Can somebody explain that? Like, how is it? Our government is in $30 trillion of debt. To who? Like, to itself? Like, that's a good, business partnership. It's just so crazy. And the ability to just print off money to try to solve problems. Like, there's something's got to give, and we've got to do something different.
It's our fault. It's, you can look at the countries around the world in our lifetime whose currencies have become next to worthless. The most recent example that I can think of is Greece, I don't know, half a dozen or so years ago. And that's a centralized system. So, Shawn, to me, the analogy is 0 to 10. If 10 is very good and 0 is absolutely worthless, how valuable would you say the USDA food pyramid is?
Oh, man. A scale of what to what?
0 to 10.
0 to 10, I'd give it a 2, because you got to eat something.
Yeah, I'd give it about a 2 as well. So if you just thought about completely handing control over your health to the USDA, you'd realize you're getting about a 2. You're missing 80% of the potential. So we're doing that with our financial health. We're handing control over our financial health to the Federal Reserve, the US government. And now I'm not someone who's, all of that's bad. They do amazing things and they're flawed. They're not perfect. So if you want a 2 out of 10 financial health, we know what we're going to get when we put all our eggs into that basket, basically eating the monetary equivalent of the food pyramid. But someone might wake up from that and say, well, instead of feeding myself based off the food pyramid, I might read Shawn's books. He seems to be a lot healthier than the people running the food pyramid. I want to pay attention to him. And the equivalent of paying attention to you for health, I think financially, is paying attention to Bitcoin and putting some of our eggs into that basket.
Powerful. Justin, if you could, because I don't want to glance over this, I mentioned a lot of folks when COVID became a part of our lives, and different scientists and researchers were coming forward and sharing data that a lot of it has proven to be correct. But at the time they were getting censored, deplatformed, and a lot of people were jumping over to sites like, platforms like Parler, for example. How is it that an entire platform can just be removed from the internet? It wasn't the company that did it. Can you talk about how that happened? But also talk about how that happened, but how Zion, that's impossible for that to happen.
The way that it happened was they were on centralized app stores. All of their code was sitting on an AWS server. So they were simply turned off of AWS. They were banned from every app store. And then their code that wrote, because usually there's like a repository that holds the actual data, not just data that's on the system, but like the code that enables it, right? The back end and front end that was also sitting on AWS. So it was just all turned off, right? I think that's the base layer of everything that was just like, okay, Amazon no more, app stores no more. So they disappeared.
So what does Amazon have to do with it?
So AWS runs, I think, 80% of the internet. And so this is where the clients themselves or data storage occurs for like a server to run, because usually you need like a relay, you need some level of a service to run, and then your phone is actually enabling that particular service.
So they're using Amazon's servers.
Yeah, he was using Amazon servers. And so
wow.
I think and there was one central point of failure. I think that's the key is like, if there's one central point of failure, it's very easy to like just turn it off, right? You turn off one thing and everything and all the lights go out. So I think the approach that we've been taking is that there's a few layers of decentralization that we've been trying to achieve that allows the differentiation inside of Zion, right? So the first piece is that the identity, your individual identity, and all the downstream effects of that identity are held by a private and public key on your personal device. So your identifier is not sitting on some sort of a Zion centralized server, right? We have our relay that's our enabled, it's open source. So that piece is owned by you. The next piece is that how do payments run inside of the network. Number one is we use Lightning. We're not using PayPal, which is another centralized service. We're not using the traditional banking environment, which goes bank to bank to bank to bank. We're using the Lightning Network, which is an open monetary network built on top of Bitcoin that allows a transaction to freely move from individuals with no level of censorship to occur. And this is across a multitude of nodes that are sitting in parallel to Zion. So the nodes are actually outside of Zion as a company that allows the payments to move freely. The final piece is that if you are a very sovereign individual, you can decide to host your own version of Zion, your own version of a relay on your own instance at your house, right? So you can take this actual data, you can take all of the things related to your DID and actually store it in your own server. And by the way, it's all also replicatable, right? So we had a great call today with Dan. Daniel was describing this thing. It's like, cool. Like if Zion for some reason wants to turn someone off, someone just takes their DID and all the downstream information and puts it somewhere else and they're running back up tomorrow, right? Like, because it's not a Zion instance. It's a decentralized standard on the open web. And your DID can be a referral everywhere. So I think that's the differentiation is like, in the new world, what's going to happen with both of you as creators is there's going to be the JP Sears verifiable DID globally, this decentralized identifier with a verifiable credential that we set and other companies will set for JP. Everyone will know that anything with this signature, this particular digital signature is a JP Sears true piece of content and truly coming from JP. That DID can sit on any type of instance on the globe. Like what's going to be cool is that in the future, Zion is just one of the apps using this open standard. And all of these different apps can talk to each other. So JP can go to the next version of something that's building on DIDs in Zion, put in his DID and all the things that he's already created for the past few years automatically pop up on that new network. And then all of this stuff pop up on this new network. It's this open standard. So I think that's why this is a little bit different is that we don't have a central point of failure. If you want to hack, you have to hack every individual ID to take all that. And I think the privacy piece that we have is also that, Zion has no access to an individual user's data. We have none because we don't have access to encrypted private information. Only the private key on the device has it.
It's remarkable. So remarkable.
One thing I want to note, by the way, please don't trust what I'm saying. Verify it, right? Like go
Yes.
to our open source code. And there's not a lot of CEOs that have balls to say this, right? Like go verify what I'm telling you. You don't have to listen to me. Go verify it. It's 100% open source.
JP, one of the things that you've been talking about, you've been doing remarkable work for many years prior to all of these crazy things taking place in the world the last 2 years. But I think you mentioned before when we had a conversation that you really found out what your mission is more recently, which is your biggest driving force is freedom. Yeah. And the title of this new book, and I've just been tearing through it. I just got my hands on it yesterday and just been tearing through it. It's so well written and just powerful. And I'm going to circle back even to the name Zion, but it's Unapologetic Freedom is the name of the book that you wrote the foreword for. And it's Justin's book that's just going to take off, of course. So what does that mean to you? Unapologetic freedom, and also you discovering that this is your driving force. What does that mean for all of us? Because I think that we tend to take our freedom for granted.
I took my freedom for granted up until spring of 2020, under the guise of the pandemic, freedom start getting taken away, and you look to the horizon and realize like, wow, if we don't change, more of our freedoms will be taken away. So a fish didn't know it was swimming in water until some of the water starts getting taken away because I was taking it for granted. That's when I woke up to realize freedom is my number one value. I think everything else hinges on freedom. Everything beautiful in life, which there's so much, it's all born out of freedom. Any piece of music, any piece of art, any sculpture, your favorite podcast, it's born out of the expression of freedom, not restriction, not control, freedom. And to me, unapologetic freedom, that term means reclaiming your birthright. I think we truly are born in a God-given state of freedom. I think that's how we are intended to be. The question is, do we claim, or if we've lost it, do we reclaim our natural state? If so, life is pretty good. Our health is pretty good. If we don't, much like anything else in health, if we're not living in accordance with natural law, we suffer. Where does that suffering show up? Is it mind, body, emotions? I don't know, but suffering happens. So to me, unapologetic freedom is simply reclaiming our birthright, what was ours and what's always been ours. Some of us have just needed to wake up and realize I haven't been claiming what's always been mine. I haven't utilized the field of diamonds in my own backyard. Freedom. We don't have to wait around for permission to be what we already are. We were born freedom. We are free now. We will die in freedom. The question is, are you living in accordance with that natural state? And we live in 2022. For everything in life, there's the digital version of it. And I think technology, the digital version, used correctly in a way that serves humanity, it enhances the natural state and it enhances the beautiful things. Used incorrectly, I think it disconnects us from our natural state. So that's why I've gotten passionate about helping illuminate the digital infrastructure of freedom and sovereignty. And I think being unapologetic and bold about it is just a good thing. We don't need to apologize for being free.
Facts. Justin, listen, as soon as I heard the name Zion, I immediately thought about Morpheus and the speech that he gave in the Matrix, in the cave in Zion. And you put that quote in the book. And I was just like, man, this guy, we're locked in here. So what has this experience been like for you? What is the mission behind putting a book like this together with all the things you got going on in your life? And JP and I were joking about this before. Like you've got some big D energy out here, man, with all the heavy lifting that you're doing. Just like for you, it's just waking up and I just eat massive, social and complex issues for breakfast, So why this book right now?
I think it's needed in a way that a piece of literature like this allows us to tell the story of what's happening in our world in a much more detailed way that we couldn't do in a podcast. I couldn't do in an interview. I couldn't do in a video series. It just wasn't enough. So it was something that was built and pent up for years that just needed to come out on a publication. And so I think it just needed to be done, right? And it was one of those things that it was obvious how all the stars aligned. Was we had an outline, we had an idea, we had someone that was willing to help us do it. So it was obvious, yeah, let's do it. Well, why wouldn't you do it if you had the opportunity to? Because we had all the magic and we thought that the world needs to hear this. And I wondered, who would else write this? Who would have the cojones to go against big tech in the way that we do in this book? A lot of people are afraid because they're afraid to get canceled. They're afraid to disappear. So it was well, we have a particular position on the world and we just want to share the truth of how things work to everybody. And this was a great medium to do that. And we had the support of our investors. Every one of our investors is either a support on the cover or on the back. And it just made sense. That was the only reason, it just needed to be written in the world. It just needed to happen. That was the only logic for me. JP, when I asked you about it, what'd you think? I was like, hey, do you think we should do this?
Yeah. People need to know is how I saw it. And because I look at my past self, Justin, before I met you, got involved with Zion, I knew we have a problem. I didn't know how it could be solved. I didn't know there was a solution. And I'm passionate about letting people know there's a solution. People just need to know. People need to know where we're at, how we got here, and how you can move forward if you choose to take your feet out of the old paradigm of digital dictatorship and move to the new paradigm of digital democracy, or don't. I want the horses to be led to water, and then they choose if the water is right for them to drink. So I just want people to know, because I'm not a techie. Most people in the world aren't techies. I didn't know there's actually a better way that social networking, amongst other things, can be done. So I look at my past self. It's like, dude, I'm glad I know for you. And I just want other people to know.
Awesome. So guys, so we've got two things here. Number one, can you let everybody know where they can get their hands on Unapologetic Freedom?
So we have on Amazon. Just go search the name Unapologetic Freedom. It will be available. I think once this podcast is live, it will be everywhere. The audiobook I think is really cool. So that I want people for the audiobook. JP and I both read the audiobook. JP, his interjections throughout the audiobook are really cool because he's reading the subchapters. He reads a lot of quotes from people. He is Morpheus. So to hear JP be Morpheus in the audiobook is so powerful. I would please get a copy of the book. We actually, it's $10. We tried to do the least amount possible to get this printed, and Amazon said this was the least we could do for this size of a book, the least amount possible. And then the audiobook. And then if you want the forward for free, we're offering JP's forward for free on the website. You could go to unapologeticfreedombook.com and you can download JP's forward for free. So if you want to get a taste of what is this going to be, we're offering the forward there. And then if you want to get the book, it's a support to our org, right? Like this book is not going to Justin. It's not going to JP. It's going to Zion as a company to help us continue to grow this utility for sovereignty in the world, right? It's going towards that because that's what we want to help provide in the world.
Second, we've got Zion, and the quote comes to mind that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I know a lot of folks are wanting to get involved with Zion to utilize it. How and when are folks going to be able to do that?
We are launching Zion.fyi starting next week. So that on the 23rd, that new website comes out. The app is available in the App Store, but the version 2 that involves decentralized identifiers, decentralized data storage with IPFS, Lightning wallets, more communities, all the interactions that we've been working on for over 6 months in the new development will be available. We're available on every major app store as well. So from Apple all the way to Android. So if you search Zion on any of those services, you'll be able to find us. So we'd love your support, and we'd love for you to be a member of our community. That's like the thing that pushes us forward isn't just the fact that, we have this book, but being on Zion and then being a member to contribute to our growth and the growth of, it's the price of a cup of coffee per month, but you could really support us in building this organization for the future and not have to subsidize our costs through anything else, but like our mission.
Yeah, this is something very special. And guys, it's not often that something like this comes along and everybody involved sees this. So I'm hoping that this is knocking at the doors of your heart and you see the importance of this, and this is a time to get involved because things are changing very quickly. As JP mentioned, right now it's either the Great Reset or the Great Awakening, and it's really about right now we're in the suck, and we're in the part of the story where we're deciding which path we're going to take. JP and I think you mentioned earlier, I'm pretty confident in which path we're going to take, but at the same time we're in it. The thing still has to get done. And JP, if you could, I want to ask you this, man, because you've been such a light for so many people during this time, and the ability to look at things through the lens of comedy and to laugh at the craziness, but it doesn't take away from the importance of it or the necessity of doing something, but being able to see things through the lens of humor is so powerful and so healing. So can you talk a little bit about that and why for you, and if you think it's possible that folks can start to, lighten up a little bit, not even take themselves so seriously and start to look at things through the lens of humor a little bit more often in our lives?
Yeah, I think it's an important tool to have. And I don't think many of us use the tool of humor for our own benefit enough. And there's two mindsets that I'd ask everybody to keep in mind. So you can benefit from the tool of humor, just like you can benefit from the tool of a given supplement. One is an Oscar Wilde quote, which has really stuck with me. Life is too important to take seriously. And then also combined with that, an Alan Watts quote, nothing is as it seems. Whether you're looking at the news, you're looking at what someone's saying to you, or you're even looking at your own thought. If you can lighten up a little bit and realize if this is true, nothing is as it seems. Here's how it seems to be. But what could the truth of it actually be? And the distance between how it seems to be and what it actually could be, the space in between is room for humor. That's the wiggle room. And when we explore that space, we're divorcing ourselves from our marriage of certainty to how things seem to be. Newsflash, just because we're certain of something doesn't make it true. It just means we feel safer the more certain we convince ourselves of that thing. But you're married to a fence post. It's not going to serve us too well. But when we can create space between us and that fence post we used to be married to, explore what could the actual reality be here. Be curious about that. Humor will help take us there. And also realizing seriousness is the psychological posture of fear. When we're really serious about something, we're usually not vulnerable enough to say, I am really afraid of that. No, we get serious as a way of avoiding how afraid we actually feel. But when whatever we're taking most seriously, if we can just be honest and say, I'm scared about this, we're already lightening the load quite a bit. And then we can start to loosen it up more by exploring like, wow, if nothing is as it seems, what could the reality be?
Perfect. Or we can have some fence post babies.
Yeah, definitely could. And I've tried to mate with fence posts in the past, Shawn, as you've taught me. It's not a comfortable process.
Oh, shit. I almost fell over, man. I'm a very visual person, so, yeah. Man, JP, listen, I appreciate you so much. Justin, thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing. It's just remarkable. And I'm grateful to just be a witness to this taking place right now and participating in this. Again, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And Zion is something that is going to change all of our lives. And it's just a matter of when are you going to get tuned into it. It's an incredibly important innovation. And thank you for the turbulence we're all experiencing to birth something like this. Because again, we had a vision of freedom that was superficial in many ways. And so now we're going to create real freedom in multiple ways. But it takes us to go through the tough stuff. And you guys are built for it. I'm built for it. Everybody listening is built for it. Let's go. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to optimize your mindset.
Most people suffer from an attention deficit disorder and an intention deficit disorder. So their mind is all over the place. Their mind has been hijacked by worry, fear, anxiety,